Hey there, YouTube. Today we're going to do something a little bit different than I've done in the past. We are going to cook. Well, bake, really. Yeah. I'm going to make some banana bread. It's a recipe that I just got from my mom, because she always made amazing banana bread. And I finally got the recipe from her. And as an early birthday present from her, I got these loaf pans, which are perfect for making 2 loaves of banana bread. For your information, we've already set the oven to preheat to 350 degrees. And these loaf pans are 5 by 9, 1.5 quart loaf pans. And I already did this recipe once and discovered that the recipe I'm making fits pretty much perfectly in those 2 loaf pans. So that's a good size to get if you don't already have loaf pans and you're interested in making some banana bread. Okay, so like I said, the oven is at 350. We're going to do this by the little recipe she gave me. First, we need a cup of butter or margarine, and a cup happens to be 2 sticks. So we unwrap these and stick them in there. Never said this was the healthiest recipe, but yeah. And then we have 2 cups of sugar. And 2 cups doesn't really sound a lot until you actually look at it. But as I recall from last night, when you start pouring it, you start to realize that a cup is actually a pretty significant amount of sugar. We're going to need more than that. Now, one of the keys to baking, at least for me, is being very exacting. I like to measure everything very carefully, because as people who actually know something about baking know, there are certain things for which precise measurements are important, and there are certain things for which they are not. However, I don't know those things, so I just measure very precisely all the time, and I think it probably comes out better that way overall. So anyway, what I'm doing is I'm using a chopstick and leveling off the sugar in this little measuring cup so that I get exactly a cup of sugar. And then dumping that into the bowl. And then doing that one more time. If I had a dry measure 2 cup, then I would use that. That's another thing to note when you are baking, is that dry measure and wet measure are different. A cup of sugar has a different volume from a cup of, say, milk. So when you use the clear measuring cups like this, they actually have like the label on the side, that's a wet measuring cup. And the solid ones like this, that you generally it's not clear, and you have a different cup for each size, so like you'll have a separate half cup, 1 cup, quarter cup, third cup, whatever. And yeah, so you want to make sure you use the right one. And this one I have here happens to be 1 cup. So that is 2 cups of sugar with 1 cup of margarine. and then we start stirring that up. It doesn't need to be stirred too carefully just yet, because we're going to do more stirring in the future, and it's really hard at this stage of things to get the margarine I'm using, but butter or margarine, to really, mix up with the sugar. They're very different substances. You can kind of get the margarine a little bit mashed up, and you can get it coated in sugar, but you're really not going to get them into a consistent mix. So that's going to be about good enough. Hopefully you can see that. I don't know how much I have to tilt it to show it on camera, but alright, and yes, we've got a wooden spoon. So then we add 4 eggs. Now, my eggs. Actually, let me go grab something. I'm going to put this milk back in the fridge for now, since this is taking longer than I thought it would. Or longer than I had hoped. Let's see, what was I doing? Bag. Generally, with eggshells, since eggs, any residual egg substances left over could get rather smelly rather quickly. With eggshells, instead of just tossing them in the garbage, I tend to get a grocery bag, which I always save because they're free, and put the eggshells into that, tie it up real tightly, and put that in the garbage, so that any kind of smell stays in the grocery bag and doesn't stink up the rest of the apartment. Another thing with eggs, if you haven't cooked with eggs before, breaking them, I've got a plastic mixing bowl, and that's really not going to work very well for breaking them. It could work, it could get the job done, but I'm probably going to use the side of this loaf pan, and if I get any raw egg on it, I'll just wash it off before actually baking with it. So, we're going to crack open the egg, let everything inside. One thing I always used to be curious about when I watched other people deal with eggs and wasn't doing them myself is how, with such an imprecise, tapping on the side of things and then opening it up like that, do you keep the shell out? And of course sometimes a little shell gets in there and you have to pick it out, but for the most part you can, do this with what looks like pieces just cracking open everywhere, and just dump egg in and have all the shells down your hands. And that is because, got a little bit of egg on the table. That is because the shell, it's got the hard outer shell, but then it's also got this kind of rubbery part inside that holds it together even after it's been pierced. Okay, I'm going to wash this off real quick along with my hands, because raw egg, not something you really want to fool around with. Oh, I did want to show you. This is my new cleaning implement. Cal had one, and I was jealous, so I went out and bought one. I'll probably put these eggs away too while I'm at it. But basically, the whole handle fills up with soap, so that the soap is dispensed into the sponge when you press this little rubber button thing, and then you have a soapy sponge. And of course it has the obvious advantage of not needing to stick your hand in the thing you're cleaning, so that's nice. Okay, we also got a little bit of egg on the tablecloth, which is not nearly as easy to clean off. I'll probably need to wash this soon. But for now, we'll probably to make do with just wiping it with a paper towel, a wet paper towel. Okay, so as you can see, cooking is full of adventures. Sometimes you spill stuff, and sometimes it's stuff you really don't want staying spilled. Hopefully, that will be the most adventurous part of our cooking experience. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to tie this up real good. Maybe let some air out so that doesn't take up too much extra room. Tie it up. Double knot it for good measure. And that's nice and sealed. The air isn't really getting out of there. So, that can go quite safely in the garbage, all by itself. And now, it won't stick up the apartment. Okay, so now we'll finally get to this mixture that we broke these eggs into. And now that we've got something a little more liquidy in there, it should be a lot easier to stir it up and start getting it more consistent. The butter, margarine, whatever, has started to melt a little bit more, and being that it's being mixed with something liquidy, it will, become a little more liquidy itself. There'll still be chunks, but, it'll definitely start becoming a mixture rather than just a couple things lumped together. And the sugar as well, will basically dissolve in the liquid egg substance and help that become more consistent as well. It's becoming easier and easier to stir. We're starting to get this substance here that's all yellow. Okay, I can start reading ahead. Okay, the next thing we're going to add, and again we're not going to be too precise with this because we're going to be stirring it more, so there's no need to get it perfect at this moment. The next thing we need is a cup of sour milk. That sounds a little bit weird. Why would you intentionally want milk to be sour? And I don't really know the answer to that reason, but it's my mother's recipe, and I don't question these things. So, the method it suggests for sour milk is to add a tiny bit of lemon juice to the milk, because an acidic substance will sour milk immediately. So you don't want to use too much, just a tiny bit, as little as you can get in there. And then, the rest of this lemon juice can go in the fridge, and I'll get the milk on that. And we have milk. Okay, we want a cup of milk. Generally, the best way to get precise measurements on liquids is to get down near its level and pour that in there like that. And again, I don't know whether this is one of the ingredients that needs to be precise or not, but I like it to be. Okay, I also don't know how much it needs to stir in to become sour, but that's probably enough. That's about how much I kind of jiggled it a little, and it came out right last time, so. And I've had this recipe many times before, so the sour milk not, going to kill you once it's baked in something. So maybe one of the YouTube viewers out there knows why it needs to be sour milk, and you can post there in a comment. Okay, so the milk is in there, and now we're stirring again a little more carefully at first, because now there's liquid all over the top of it, and if I stir vigorously like I was before, then it will just splash milk everywhere. We're starting to get something that's kind of consistent here. Now, with baking, another thing that I've learned from various baking, I actually took a It was a required class in middle school about baking. I remember a lot of stuff from that. So that's where some of these random seeds of knowledge are coming from, rather than things passed down from my mother. Now with baking in general, and the recipe will usually tell you to do this, you want to mix a lot of your wet ingredients, the sugar being the exception of this particular recipe, but you want to generally mix a lot of your wet ingredients together first in one bowl, and mix all your dry ingredients together in another bowl, and then once you're all done with both of those things, then you combine them. And like I said, it'll generally tell you, then combine this and this and this and this, then combine, in a separate bowl this and this and this, then combine the, contents of the two bowls. And to be honest, again, I don't really know the logic behind this, but I suspect it has to do with the consistency of it. If I had just started pouring in flour and then pouring in baking soda and pouring in salt, then a lot of those things wouldn't really get mixed completely thoroughly throughout. Especially if I added little things like baking soda, which you're only getting like 2 teaspoons of. If I added those last, then it would be really hard with something that's pretty much already the consistency of batter to get that thoroughly mixed throughout. And it's important with something that little that it be mixed throughout, because there is a lot of it and it needs to be in the whole bread and in both loaves of bread. So that is probably a lot of the reasoning behind it. There could also be some kind of reason that actually involves how things mix together. But again, I don't know. If you know better than I do, maybe you can post it in a comment. Okay, so this is looking pretty well mixed. There are still some lumps, but I don't think we're going to get them out at this point. And we will deal with them when we are mixing it with other stuff. Okay, so as I said, we're doing the dry ingredients separately. We'll set this bowl of wet ingredients aside and pick up the recipe again and a new bowl. Okay, next we need a couple kinds of flour. We've got the all-purpose flour, aka white flour. My mom suggests unbleached. I've used bleached before, and I don't really know much of the differences, but, because she mentioned it on the recipe, I went ahead and bought some, since I'm going to be making quite a bit, and she actually even recommended this brand, King Arthur. So, we have King Arthur unbleached flour, all-purpose flour. As I said, this is the white flour, the kind that you're kind of used to seeing in general. And there are other kinds of flour, such as wheat flour, which we'll get to in a minute. But, yeah, this is the flour that if you made bread using just this flour, you would get white bread, because it doesn't have any other stuff in it. At least that's how I understand it works. We need a little bit more in there. As you can see, I need a little bit of practice pouring it and such, but for this leveling off method, you generally want to overfill it so that you can, level off the excess back into the bag, as I'm doing. Ideally, some containers for my ingredients, like my mom has, some plastic sealed containers to store flour and sugar and all that in, would probably help. It's a much bigger surface area to store it in, it's airtight, these bags, and that would be useful. Now we're going to want 3 cups of this unbleached all-purpose flour. So we're going to be doing this for a bit longer. And I am getting a little bit in there, which kind of violates my whole precise ingredients thing. But I am reasonably certain that flour is one of the ingredients that doesn't need to be as precise. In general, if there is a little of an ingredient, then it's much more important to be precise with it than if there's a lot of an ingredient. It's just kind of common sense. If you've got, well, I mean, using a non-baking example, if you've got $1 million, it's less important to you to lose $1 than it is if you only have $5, and similarly, if you have 3 cups of flour, it's less important if, an extra teaspoon of flour ends up in there than if you're using 2 teaspoons of baking soda. An extra teaspoon at that point is like 1.5 extra, and that's kind of a little more important. Okay, so since I've spilled some in, I'm probably going to be pretty generous with leveling off in this case, and maybe leave some gaps in there. And of course I'm getting flour everywhere, but that's kind of part of baking. Okay, so I've put 3 cups of the unbleached white flour in there. Unbleached all-purpose flour, as it's called in the package. And I'm actually going through this stuff pretty quickly. I just bought this for my other recipe, and it's a pretty good-sized bag that's, I think, about halfway done. So I probably have 1 or 2 more batches of banana bread in there, and then I've got to buy some more flour. But, baking ingredients don't tend to be too expensive, so that's part of the reason people bake instead of just buying everything pre-made. Other than the fact that it's delicious and kind of fun. So the next ingredient we have here is wheat flour. I kind of implied that there was going to be another type of flour involved. Now, you only want 1 cup of this, and if you don't have wheat flour, or don't feel like buying a separate kind of flour, it says on this recipe that you can use 4 cups of the all-purpose flour, and then about a ½ cup of wheat germ, which, as far as I know, this stuff is just kind of wheat or flour and wheat germ, and that's what makes it wheat flour. But I could be totally off base there. But whatever the case, if you don't feel like using wheat flour and buying it separately, then that is an alternative that the recipe says you can use. I just went ahead and bought it because I plan on making banana bread fairly frequently now. I'd actually like to make it once a week. My comic book store that I work at, like every comic book store, gets comics in on Wednesdays. That's just the day of the week that comics always come in for everyone in the world, really. All the release dates of all the comics are on Wednesday. And so because we are a huge internet business, we send out thousands and thousands of comics every week, it tends to be a big fiasco, everyone gets there early. Pretty much everyone who works there on Wednesdays at some point. There's no other day where everyone is there, except for, specific events. So yeah, pretty big fiasco, and, because everyone's there earlier and everything, if people bring in, other food and such, then It's generally very much appreciated. And I used to have a coworker named Chris who would make banana bread, but he ended up leaving to search for other job opportunities. And at the time I didn't have the loaf pans and didn't have the recipe and didn't really think about it. But then I kind of got craving it again and was like, you know what, I could make my own banana bread and I can bring it in and everyone will like me for having banana bread. I'm going to brush some of this flour off the tablecloth so it's not too saturated on there. Next, let's see, combined flours, baking soda. We need 2 teaspoons of baking soda. As I mentioned, because there's a small amount, this is most likely one of the ingredients that requires a great deal of precision. A little bit extra or a little bit less could probably affect the taste of the bread. Luckily, a teaspoon is much easier to just scoop, level off, drop in, and then we want another one. It is of course important to make sure you're using teaspoons and not tablespoons. TSP is abbreviated teaspoon and TBSP is abbreviated tablespoon. They're kind of tricky abbreviations because TSP could just as easily be a tablespoon if they decide to do it that way, but they didn't, so that's just something to remember on your baking adventures. Okay, and I am getting flour everywhere. Okay, so then we need 4 teaspoons of baking powder. Very important not to mix up baking soda, baking powder. They have similar names and similar appearance, but if you mix up which is which, things aren't going to taste right. By the way, this is a tablespoon. It is bigger than a teaspoon. This is the teaspoon. Now as it turns out, 3 teaspoons equals 1 tablespoon. My measuring spoons have how many milliliters they are, so that's easy to remember for me because this one is 5 milliliters. You probably can't actually read that, but that one says 5 milliliters, that one says 15 milliliters, so 5 times 3 is 15, so there's 3 of these and 1 of these. So that means, since I need 4 teaspoons of baking powder, that's 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon. So rather than sit here and scoop with that spoon 4 times, I can just scoop with this spoon once and that spoon once. And then we have 4. That's math right there. Didn't think you'd be using math in baking, did you? Well, you use math. You use math everywhere. Sorry, it's like 1 in the morning or something. Actually, what time is it anyway? Yes, it is in fact 1:45 in the morning, and I'm baking. But don't worry too much about my sleep schedule, because as it turns out, I actually got a nap in. It was somewhat accidental. I was kind of using the computer and falling asleep, and then finally I was like, you know what, I'm going to be falling asleep. I may as well just go to bed and take a nap there. So I ended up going to sleep around 6:30, and didn't wake up till 11. So I've got like 4.5, 5 hours of sleep already under my belt. So even though I have to be up at like 7, 8 o'clock tomorrow, I'm still going to be good. Even if I stay up a couple more hours now. And I'll probably even only stay up another, let's say, 2 hours. And then I can get to bed at like 3 and get another 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and that'll be good for the night. Maybe even catch up a little bit on the sleep that I haven't been getting. Okay, so that was the baking powder. And then we need salt. I don't know why I don't have my other measuring spoon, but hang on 1 second. Okay, we need a half teaspoon of salt. And if you haven't been writing down this recipe yet, then it's probably, if you're planning on making it, I wouldn't suggest playing the video and doing things along with me. I would suggest writing it down and doing things differently. So, we need a quarter teaspoon of salt. Wait, that's a quarter. The recipe says a half. I don't know why. I might not have a half. I might just have a third and a quarter. Ah, here's the half. Okay. Okay, so we have a half of a teaspoon, which as it turns out, for those who can do math, 2.5 milliliters. Check that out. That's half of 5. Okay. It's still almost 2 in the morning. So we have this half a teaspoon thing here. And with salt, I generally just try to pour slowly so I don't have to level it off. There's already one in there, but yes, that looks about right. So we'll dump that salt in there. Okay. And it does mention here you add each thing gradually, stirring each time. Again, that's for making things nice and consistent throughout the bowl. And I do think you generally want to add the ingredients you have the most of first, like flour, and add things like the baking soda, powder, and salt afterwards, just because you get a good base of the flour. If you add the small things first, they could kind of get clumped up at the bottom and you might not be able to stir down to them, if you know what I mean. Okay, so this is looking pretty well blended. It's a very consistent color. Kind of the color it took on right after I put it in the wheat flour. It's a little bit whiter than the wheat flour, obviously, because there's more white, but it's wheater than the white flour. So then, the add gradually, stirring each time, now that I'm remembering, is actually for mixing this into here. And what it's saying is we want to gradually add this to this. And in the time, excuse me, still got a little bit of a cough. In the time that it took me to mix that together, this has separated a little, so we're just going to stir it up a bit. And then we're going to gradually add the dry ingredients to the wet ingredients. Got a little bit. I'm getting stuff everywhere. I don't know how I did this last time. I think I used the bigger spoon in there, and that would have been intelligent. So note to self, use a longer spoon in this bowl, because this stuff holds the spoon up, this stuff doesn't. So, we add a little bit of dry to the wet, and then we stir that in a bit. It's already starting to combine and look a little bit like dough rather than like soup. Kind of a weird color for soup, but consistency, not actual appearance. Add some more, and look, it's already starting to hold the spoon better. And then I stir some more. I think I'm adding about a third each time. I don't know if that's more or less than I should, but it seems about right. And since I've added a third each time, approximately, that leaves the rest to go in. And then we finish stirring. Now at this point, once we finish stirring this, it's really going to start looking like batter. I actually had a conversation with Jen last night about the difference between batter and dough. And batter is much more liquidy. Now see, I had always thought that if it was going in a cake, it was batter, and if it was going into bread, it was dough. But as it turns out, dough needs kneading, and batter just needs mixing. And you can have bread batter, not just cake batter. So what we're making here is very clearly batter, because all we're going to do is stir it. And I need a little more leverage here. I do think the bigger spoon is definitely better to use in here. And now that we've combined them, there's no reason I can't switch spoons. So, for future reference, bigger spoon into the wet ingredients, smaller spoon into the dry. Okay. Anyway, as I mentioned, this dough is starting to thicken, or better. I just had a whole conversation and I call it dough. How lame is that? So, the batter is beginning to thicken and look very batter-like, perhaps even almost dough-like, but not quite, because it's still more liquidy. Dough, you can pretty much get up in a ball and hold it, and you can hold the whole thing, whereas batter, if you try to do that, will slip through your fingers, and that's what this would clearly do. I can hold it like this now, but you can see it's kind of oozing down, and that is because it is batter. I can't believe I just spent all that time telling you the difference between dough and batter. You must think this is incredibly lame. But, I really need something to talk about while I'm sitting here stirring. On the cooking shows they have everything all pre-prepared, but I honestly don't have the budget to pre-prepare like 5 different versions of this dish at different stages. So, you're just getting the whole deal here. I probably will do a bit of a time-lapse thing when I put it in the oven. This is good news for you, because otherwise you'd have to watch an hour of it cooking in the oven. Although I can't actually upload an hour-long video, so I guess that wouldn't work anyway. In fact, I can only get up to about 45 minutes on this memory card, so maybe I should... Well, let's do a time check real quick. Come around to the back of the camera. You can't see me, but I can see what you're seeing. Okay. This has been going on about 38 minutes, so I've got about, about 8 minutes left before this video finishes, so I'd better do this relatively quickly. Now, it actually says that it calls for 2 cups of ripened bananas. Ripened means you don't really want the green ones. You want as ungreen as you can, and even some brown on there is probably a good thing. This is another substance that we're going to grab a bag, because banana peels certainly rot a bit as well. Now I think part of the reason, other than the taste of course, for wanting really ripened bananas is that they mush a lot easier, and you generally want pretty mushy bananas. My mom used to make banana bread out of whatever bananas, we didn't eat in time and had already become just a little bit more brown and mushy than you really want to eat a banana. But in bread, they still come out tasting great. So It's a good use for fruit if you eat bananas, but sometimes, buy too many and have a bunch left over. You can use those leftover bananas. And bananas are cheap too. I bought these 5 bananas for $1.25 for 5 bananas. That's like 25 cents a banana. So 25 cents for, let's face it, a pretty tasty piece of fruit. And that's pretty much the only thing that I have to buy every time I make this recipe. As I said, it looks like that flour is going to last me about 3 or 4 recipes of this, 3 or 4 repetitions of this recipe. I don't know. But each time I make it, it makes 2 loaves. So that's like 8 loaves of banana bread right there, just in that thing of flour that, I don't remember how much it cost me, but, so I'm a little paranoid, and this is probably just a me thing, about that silly little thing at the bottom of a banana. It kind of hooks up and it looks like a needle or something. And so that's why you may notice I'm kind of breaking the banana off at the bottom rather than putting in every usable bit of banana. This may or may not be a good idea, but it makes me feel better because I don't like the little pokey thing. Okay, so now I've got 5 bananas in a bowl, all peeled and stuff. And then we take a 3rd spoon. There's all kinds of crazy spoons in this. And we start chopping them up. That's why I chose the more pointy spoon with a more of an edge. Because even though you're eventually trying to mush the bananas, the best way to get mushed bananas is to first get chopped bananas and chop them into smaller and smaller pieces until they kind of naturally start mushing themselves. When you get to the point where, it's a piece so small that when you try and chop it in half, it mushes instead, that's when you know you're getting the pieces down enough. I was saying earlier, the recipe calls for 2 cups of banana, which is kind of hard to measure, but it also mentions that's about 5 medium bananas. Don't go picking out the particularly large looking ones or the particularly small looking ones. Just get about 5 normal looking bananas and you should do alright. This is obviously one of the ingredients that doesn't require very precise measurement because A, there's a lot of it. The only ingredient that there's more of is the flour. And B, you really can't get too precise a measurement. It's just the nature of fruit that it's always going to grow differently. And unless you, peel part of bananas and, put them in, and I don't even know exactly how you'd measure it. It would probably be liquid measure, and you'd probably just have to kind of jam them into the measuring cup. But all of that is really ridiculous and kind of pointless, because you can just grab 5 bananas, toss them in there, and call it a day. Okay, so these are getting pretty mashed. Now getting them perfect is not entirely necessary. I do like to get them as mashed as possible, but in general, I always remember growing up, and I noticed in my own that I made yesterday, that banana bread almost always is going to have little pieces of banana in it. So, because that's just kind of nature of the beast, you just have to kind of accept that it's not going to be perfectly mashed, and just get it as good as you have the patience for. So that's looking pretty mushy. Then finally that all goes into the bowl with the other 2 things that are mixed in there, the wet ingredients, the dry ingredients, and the bananas. Now, one other point that I can talk about while I'm mixing is part of the conversation last night with Jen that you may find entertaining, is we were discussing the difference between cake and bread. And this is why the whole, I thought that batter was just cake substance and dough was just bread substance, but she assures me that batter can be bread or cake. And in fact, the only difference really between certain types of bread, such as pumpkin bread and banana bread, and their equivalent cake, pumpkin cake, banana cake, is what you bake it in. If you put it in a loaf pan, then it becomes bread. If you put it in, a cake pan, it becomes cake. If you put frosting on it, then clearly it's cake. But yeah, so it's really all in the shape and not in the actual substance. But bread sounds healthier, so we like to continue to call it banana bread and bake it in loaves, because clearly, even though the recipe originally said banana cake, we're making banana bread. This is healthy. It has fruit in it and 2 cups of sugar, but we're ignoring those 2 cups of sugar and calling it bread because it is healthy, and I can eat it for breakfast. Okay, so that's looking pretty well stirred. Like I said, there's still lumps of banana in there, but that's just going to be a fact of life. And I could stir here for hours and hours, and you could listen to me talk about nothing at all. But I don't think either of us wants that. And as I said, my camera memory stick is only so large, even though it is relatively large. So I'm using cooking spray. Okay, so as it turns out, my memory stick ran out of space. That's kind of a little sad and scary, but I'll just chop this video onto the end of it and reduce the file size a little, and it's going to be a truly epic video. If you've watched this whole thing, this is like a movie right here, except a lot more boring with no plot. So, as you can see, or hopefully you can see, I have put the batter into the pans. I've left about an inch on top. With these pans, since this recipe happens to work out so well, it leaves about an inch on top, all by itself. But if you're using your own pans, make sure you leave that inch. If you have extra batter, put it in like another thing. Another thing that my mom mentioned, especially for the first time you're trying the recipe, you might want to put a cookie sheet in the oven. Let me actually pick up the camera now. You might want to put up a cookie sheet in the oven under the pans to kind of catch any batter in case some does spill over, because bread and cake both rise as they cook. I did that the first time. I didn't do it this time because I've already done this recipe once, and I know that the things are the perfect size and all that. But if you do it, then go ahead and put it in there while you preheat it, to preheat the pan as well, so it isn't any, extra factor. So I'm doing this one-handed now, which probably isn't the most brilliant thing ever, but they've got these handy little handles, so that kind of works out. But that way I can hold the camera. So, we are putting the bread in. I'm not certain whether it matters which shelf you use. We're actually going to test that theory because last time I put it on the bottom shelf and now I'm putting it on the top shelf. So, we shall see if it matters. Because I'm crazy like that. Okay, so it's in there. It's baking. And we set our timer for an hour and 10 minutes. That's 15. The recipe actually says 1 hour, but as I said, I did this recipe yesterday and ended up, I used what's typically a toothpick trick, where you stick a toothpick in, see if it comes out clean. If it doesn't, you keep going. I did that twice, 5 minutes each, so it came out to about 10 minutes. But I didn't have a toothpick, so I used a chopstick. So yeah, we're going to let that bake a bit and upload some of my videos from when Kate was here, because I still haven't gotten around to uploading those. And I'm going to clean up my dining room a tad bit. Probably not do any dishes because Jen is coming on Friday, and she always likes to have dishes to do, so we're going to leave her plenty of dishes to do. I will, however, rinse the milk out of the measuring cup, because it's apparently supposed to already be sour, and on top of that, it could really start to smell if I leave it for very long. So that's that. So yeah, I will finish this video in an hour and 10 minutes, when it will hopefully be done, and I'll check it again, and you'll get to see the finished product. Bye. Hey there, YouTube. Oh, so good. Okay, it's still recording. Yes, the timer just went off, as you can hear. And that probably means that we have banana bread. Oh, that's looking pretty good. We're going to check it with a chopstick. We're going to make sure we clean the chopstick. We're going to put the camera up here, just under the water and stuff. I went back and watched the beginning of this video, and it is truly epic. But you can't really see my face, so sorry about that. But I guess it's more what I'm doing that matters, and not my expression or any of that. So it probably works out. Okay, so I'm fairly certain this is done, but it is generally a good idea to at least check. So we have chopstick, and we can get a video of this part. Oh, going in there, poking the middle of it, and that came out pretty clean. Yeah, a little bit of chromeness on there, but really all of the gooey part is no longer gooey. It is just bread. So yeah, I'm going to put the camera up here again. This is up on my fridge, by the way. So that I can take it out with two hands. Because I don't want to try the one-hand thing and then drop it and have an epic disaster. So, comes out. It's a little bit crispy, but that one actually even looks a little bit burnt, so maybe I should spend less time dilly-dallying next time and set the timer for like 5 minutes. But I think it should still be very tasty. Turning the oven off. So yeah, next time, hour and 5 minutes on the timer. Check it, stand by, be ready, all that good stuff. So yeah, now you can see we have 2 loaves of banana bread. We gotta let them cool a little bit before I actually take them out. But as I learned from last time, because I put the cooking oil in there, they really slide out easily. You don't even actually need to pry up in there. You can just lay down plastic wrap, whatever you're putting them on, and then just turn the pan over, and it just falls right out. It's really cool like that. So that is the end of this hour-long epic video about me making some banana bread. If you actually watch the song, you probably should go outside or something now, because this has been kind of disgustingly long. Yeah, you may have noticed I have a towel because I took a shower while they were cooking, baking stuff, things. Okay, hope you enjoyed, if you actually sat through it, and I will make another video another night. For tonight, I'm going to sleep. You should too, unless it's like daytime there, in which case, like I said, outside. You've been sitting at the computer way too long. Okay, bye.